Hi, this is Mike Carter with Carter Custom Knives once again. In my last couple of videos I showed you how we made the brass bolsters for this knife and also how we fitted these beautiful Mammoth ivory handles. I also showed you a little bit how I do some of my brass or some of my vine file work on this. We're almost finished with this one. We've got a couple more things to do. We need to make a nice sheath for it. And finally I'll sharpen it and then give it a little final buffing. I do wait until the last thing to sharpen these. Okay, I'm going to go back out to the shop and punch some holes through this with the drill press, and then I'm going to hit the edge on the belt sander one more time just to clean it up. Don't really see any need to videotape that. It's pretty self-explanatory. So after we get that done, we'll sew it up. Well, I haven't convinced myself to invest a couple of $1,000s in a stitching machine yet, so I'm still sewing everything by hand. I've got my holes all drilled here, the edges cleaned up. As you can see, this is a pretty thick sheath, so it's going to be a little bit of a chore to punch these needles through all this leather. I've got it clamped up in a stitching pony, which is a neat little device that you sit on the base and it holds your work for you. And I'm going to be doing this with a saddle stitch using 2 threads, which is a very good way to stitch them because it locks every thread. If you break a thread, it won't unravel on you. What I like to do is back stitch 2 or 3 holes at the start and the finish. Just give it a little extra strength. So I'm going to start here on the back side at the 3rd hole. And I'm going to take my 2nd thread, start on the back side at the 2nd hole. And leave about that much thread hanging loose. And I'm going to go back to my 1st thread and bring it through that 2nd hole from the front. And then I can go back to the front through the 1st hole. So what you'll see throughout this process is the 2 different threads are going to go through each hole in opposite directions. And on these first 2 or 3 holes, they're going to go each thread's going to go through it twice. And I'm using a 3-strand waxed thread that I bought from Tandy Leather. Now both threads have been up to the 1st hole, so I'm just coming back down now. So at every hole you should wind up with the thread coming through the same hole in opposite directions. And some people like to punch their needle through from either side and then just draw them both up at the same time. Just whatever works for you. So that's going to be our process. Okay, we're just about finished up here. Coming up to the last couple of holes. So just like when I started, I'm going to backstitch 2 or 3 holes here. That's just going to give me a little extra strength here at the start and finish, where it's going to get the most stress from putting the knife in and out of the sheath. Plus, by putting more thread through these 2 or 3 holes, it's going to lock that thread down better. I mean, you can really feel it, that it's a lot tighter getting it through the holes. And I want my threads to both end up on the back side where I'll cut them off. Now we can just snip that off right there, flush. And it's so tight coming through that hole, it's not going to back out. Then what I like to do is just take my hammer and flatten it down good. And you can see how nicely that thread lays in that groove there. Okay, I've got a couple more quick steps I'm going to do before I finish this up. First, I'm going to take this edge beveler and just put a slight bevel on these edges, take this sharp edge off of the leather. And I'm going to bevel inside the belt loop here. Just anywhere there's a sharp edge on that leather. Then I've got a little burnishing tool. This is just a plastic tool. It's got some grooves cut in it, different widths. And I'm going to use that to burnish the edge of this belt loop. And that just kind of rolls it down. Puts a nice finish on these edges. And then finally, I'm going to burnish the edges of the sheath here. And again, I'm just using a piece of Mammoth ivory. You could use a piece of plastic, a nice smooth wood, just about anything that will just flatten that down. Okay, I'm going to finish dyeing it, and you'll also see how my mark will come out. Again, I'm using medium brown gel antique from Tandy Leather. And putting it on with a damp sponge. If you really want the antique look, which would be a little bit of age look, kind of streaky a little bit, you can put it on real heavy and just kind of swirl it around, let it sit for a few minutes, and then come back with the damp sponge and wipe it again, and it'll give you that real antique look. But the more you rub it, the more it'll even back out and just be a nice medium brown, so you can kind of do it either way. Always try to put it on pretty heavy on the edges. You really got to work it down into your tool work here. Now I'm going to rinse my sponge out and then just come back and wipe it lightly again with just a clean damp sponge. And I'm going to show you here on my maker's mark where we did that resist. That's how we came out there. And it still doesn't look too sharp. I mean, colors and everything, but it's still wet. As this dries out, and we'll come back and buff this down a little bit with some sheepskin. I think you'll be impressed at how the luster will come out in this. Okay, we're going to let this dry for a little while, and then I'll come back when it's dry. While the sheath is drying, I'll put another one of my finishing touches on the knife here. I coat everything with this Renaissance wax. Wonderful stuff, especially for a mirror polish blade. polished handles, brass, everything. It just puts a really good protective coating on everything. And like I said, I'm going to use it on the brass, the ivory, everything. Simple use, just wipe it on. You don't have to sit and let it dry. You can wipe it right back off. It leaves a real good protective coating on it. This is what the museums use. And it is just a paste wax. You can really see where it is and where you need to wipe it off. Okay, finally, our sheath is dry, and I'm going to take a little sheep's wool and just buff that out. And that just really brings the luster out in this leather. And there we are. So all that's left is to put an edge on it and shoot a couple of photos. Okay, we're almost finished with this knife, but a knife isn't much good without an edge on it. So we'll do a little sharpening now. You know, I have a primary bevel here, but then I'll cut a secondary bevel that'll actually be the cutting edge. And I do this with a slack belt, which gives me a slightly convex edge. And I'm just going to start off with a good sharp 220. You can see I'm working on the slack area up here ahead of the wheel. I'm going to do this until I see the wire edge start to roll over. Okay, we progressed down just a couple of passes with some finer grits, and I'm down to 800 grit now. I'll just do a couple of quick passes here, just to clean that edge up a little bit more. And finally, we're going to strop it with a leather belt. think we're pretty good. And finally, we need to shoot some good pictures. So once again, this is Mike Carter with Carter Custom Knives. Thanks for watching.